Is Joe Biden trying to force the hand of Benjamin Netanyahu publicly, or is Benjamin Netanyahu gaslighting Joe Biden?
Thanks so much for having me on. I think it's not quite as simple as gaslighting or forcing hands. The Israelis have agreed to the terms of this agreement over the course of negotiations. What still remains a question for Israel is what that timeline is going to look like and what needs to happen first in order for this ceasefire to take effect. So the Israelis are hoping to continue their operation in Rafah, to continue all of this as Hamas considers a deal. And what we're hearing from the Israeli government is they don't really expect Hamas to accept these terms. But ultimately, what Biden is doing is he is creating a narrative whereby Bibi Netanyahu has agreed to a proposal. He is now holding him accountable for it publicly and putting a huge amount of pressure on the Israeli government internally to stand by it, despite opposition from right-wing actors in Bibi's government who could potentially bring that government down.
Well, Carmiel, on that point, it was striking to see over the weekend comparisons to the threats against Benjamin Netanyahu if he were to agree to this, to essentially what we experienced here in the U.S. with the ouster of Kevin McCarthy, effectively. You do this, we give you an ultimatum, you'll be kicked out. How realistic is it that that could happen in the Israeli government as a result of this?
Yeah, Netanyahu's government has been extremely fragile. Particularly as the war has waged on, and we've seen increasing tension points between Bibi and the far-right governing coalition. And those tensions have been over both how the war is being executed, how humanitarian aid is being delivered, and who's being recruited to serve in Israel's military. So we've seen these tension points and fragility for a long time. Indeed, the far-right in Israel could bring down the government. The Likud party, Netanyahu's own party, could also bring down the government. 5 members of Likud could defect and bring it down. So we're seeing lots of tensions, and there is that concern for Netanyahu, which makes it very difficult for him to make concessions on the international front. He's under a huge amount of pressure from hostage families to secure the release of hostages, but he's also under a huge amount of pressure from the far right to make sure that Hamas is obliterated in Gaza.
Carmiel, yesterday, John Kirby, the White House National Security Council Strategic Communications Coordinator, was talking about this and shared that Israel was expected to say yes to the updated ceasefire plan that the president shared last week. Here he is.
We have every expectation that if Hamas agrees to the proposal, as was transmitted to them, an Israeli proposal, that Israel would say yes. Prime Minister Netanyahu's team, in fact, his foreign minister, again, just said that they welcome this announcement by the president and that they did, in fact, agree that this was their proposal.
Yet on Saturday, Carmiel, Benjamin Netanyahu's office said, quote, Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed, unquote. So is the truth somewhere in the middle here? We've got a 6-week pause in fighting on the table. Is that what we should be reaching for now?
Yeah, and I think the question also is how quickly these stages unfold. The idea is that a first stage, which would include a ceasefire and a withdrawal of Israeli forces, would include then negotiations for a more permanent outcome. What they have said is that a number of hostages will be released. One of the conditions that the Israelis have put forward that they have backed away from is that that would include both deceased bodies as well as living hostages. So that's a key compromise provision that we hadn't seen earlier. But at the same time, the question is what then takes us to the next phase of a more permanent ceasefire and the removal of Hamas from power. And I think that's where, again, the devil is really in the details.
I wonder how much of this will be ironed out if this will ultimately have been accepted by next week, Carmiel, when we understand Benjamin Netanyahu will be giving a joint address to a joint session of Congress. How complicated will the politics around that address be, not just here at home, but for him as he also is kind of addressing a domestic audience, too?
Absolutely. So I would not expect that his address to Congress will in any way weigh in the decision-making factor around a ceasefire agreement. I would really separate those two things. But when Netanyahu comes to Washington, he's going to be facing considerable headwinds from Democrats. The progressives are likely to boycott the speech. And he's also going to be looking at the United States on the cusp of an election. So the first thing he's going to have to do is to come forward and in many ways have a Zelensky moment to really affirm why the United States needs to continue to support Israel militarily, particularly after the huge fight we just saw over the emergency supplemental funding package to Israel. Netanyahu is being reminded that he can't take this relationship for granted. And the second thing he's going to really need to do is to lay out some kind of a vision for the day after Gaza, whether that's an immediate ceasefire or a long-term ceasefire, and then what comes after that. That's going to be the moment where he can really talk about it.
This plan centers around, of course, not just a ceasefire, but the resumption of an increase in supplying humanitarian aid to Gaza. I wonder your thoughts on this temporary pier that we've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and tens of millions of dollars into building. It's being repaired, apparently, after weather damage and will at some point be brought back in. Is this still part of the grand plan that the U.S. is offering?
I think that, again, as we've discussed on past calls, the humanitarian needs in Gaza are extensive, and each effort to administer aid is really just a drop in the bucket. We knew that there were going to be complications around the pier, not just the pier itself, which is having its own problems, but moving goods from that pier throughout the Gaza Strip to people who need it the most. That challenge will continue until there is a ceasefire. Certainly a ceasefire and a cessation of violence will make transporting goods through the Strip easier, but challenges will remain, including a lack of infrastructure, desperation, and other issues. So there are going to be no easy fixes to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, even during the ceasefire.
Well, if there's no easy fixes, Carmiel, how will we know? What metrics will we have to weigh whether or not that humanitarian aid aspect of the ceasefire deal has actually been completed or that adequate effort has been put in? How do you judge this?
Yeah, I think averting the most dire of circumstances, whether it's starvation or another health crisis, which is something that had been brewing but has thus far actually been averted, is something that will really help serve as an indicator. But we will see that aid move. Whether or not it's going to be enough and whether or not it's going to move quickly enough is going to continue to be a challenge. But I do think there is the prospect for an improvement.